Well, Greenpeace has not always supported the introduction of forests into the UNFCCC framework. We have been concerned that it will lead to significant offsets and therefore reduction in the effort that industrial countries have to achieve to reduce emissions to the point where we don't see a 2-degree increase in temperature and all the dire consequences that is likely to arrive at. But in Bali, we realised that we were probably going to be given some sort of red process, and there were a lot of organisations, a lot of conservation organisations, particularly from the United States, that were pushing very, very strongly for a market-based approach to RED. So basically, fully fungible trading offsets between developing tropical forested countries and developed countries. Basically, it would allow a developed country, a wealthy polluting country, to buy carbon credits from the developing world, and that would allow them to continue to pollute. Greenpeace finds that a real problem, not only for the mitigation that we need from greenhouse gas emissions, but also for the biodiversity protection that could be achieved from protecting forests, and from Indigenous people who, in a purely market-driven framework, would have little influence over potentially their homes. So Greenpeace has put together a proposal and released it in Bali at the COP last year that basically tries to raise enough money to protect forests. Currently there's about 13 million hectares of forests that are disappearing from the world every year, and these forests are home to some 400 million people. They're home to hundreds of thousands of animals and millions of species. We're heading towards a major extinction crisis, not only with the impacts of climate change but through deforestation. So Greenpeace arrived at a process that would raise enough money to protect those forests, but would provide a buffer between the worst ravages of the market and the developing countries, the Indigenous people and the biodiversity that live in the forests there. We call it TDERM, Tropical Deforestation Emission Reduction Mechanism, or Forests for Climate.
Can you say it more slowly?
Well, it's a tropical deforestation emission reduction mechanism. It basically relies on the Kyoto market that it has been developed under the Kyoto Protocol that allows wealthy countries to buy credits. So it basically, currently there are permits that are issued to countries who undertake an emission reduction target. For instance, the European Union took a 5% emission reduction target for the last commitment period. So then it was issued with emission permits up to that 95% of their allowable emissions. They're called allowable AAUs, or assigned amount units. Currently they're being given away for nothing. Greenpeace believes they should be sold, that the polluter should pay for the right to pollute rather than just being able to do it for nothing. And a proportion of that funding from the auctioning of those pollution permits would then go into a fund that would distribute the money under a certain set of criteria for forest protection. One of those criteria we're very strong on is Indigenous peoples' involvement in the process and Indigenous peoples receiving quite a large proportion of that funding. Now, there have been a number of Indigenous peoples' organisations and groups who have been very concerned about RED, and I can see why. I mean, it's if you're looking at a pure market trading position, you get a market trader that wanders into Papua New Guinea, and Papua New Guinea is a very good example because they actually has been no enclosure movement there, so Indigenous peoples have rights over their land in much more than in most places in the world. But a market trader could go in there to, say, Lake Murray, convince the central government that they were going to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Then those people in that area would have no rights over where that money was going from. They would have no rights over receiving any money. there may indeed even be the possibility for gross human rights abuses if those peoples were to object to those forests being protected. So there are significant concerns. We believe that a fund approach administered by the United Nations may not be able to remove all risks, but as we have it now, there are significant risks to Indigenous people and forest communities from deforestation and illegal logging and so on and so forth. So we believe this will benefit Indigenous people much more than a market-based mechanism, and it will certainly provide much more benefit for the biodiversity and forest protection, because it doesn't require it doesn't necessarily require emission reductions. We can look at conservation proposals, we can look at trust funds for Indigenous peoples, we can look for Indigenous participation in whether a particular area is protected or not, how it's protected, the activities that have been going on there can be protected, and basically the local communities can have a say in what happens, at least much more than in a pure market framework. So
how would that fund be looking